If I were to ask you about tribal courts, what would you think of? Would you think of a group of people deep in the Amazon? Maybe a tribe of people within the depths of the jungle, not knowing that American civilization and the modern world even exists? Well, they're actually not as much that crazy or that extreme. They're actually a lot more similar to the courts that we see today in the traditional United States of America. So the National Center for State Courts does a great job of describing what tribal courts really are. Tribal courts are courts of general jurisdiction that often have broad criminal jurisdiction as well. The general rule is that the states have little to no jurisdiction over the activities that are done in Indian country or within the tribes, and that also goes vice versa. So an example of this would be is if I, a non-native, go into a reserve and I were to commit a crime, there is technically nothing that can be done by the native police force or the native authorities. What would have to be done is I would have to be detained by them, and then they would have to call in a state trooper as close as they could, and then they would have to handle it from that situation. So technically, they have no jurisdiction over what I'm doing. So the tribal sovereignty is completely being threatened for these Native Americans. Tribal sovereignty is something that I'm going to be referencing a lot throughout this speech. So the definition of tribal sovereignty is that it refers to the right of the Native Americans to govern themselves. So this is a constitutional right that was given to them and that we have to adhere to. So looking back at the example I kind of just gave you about me going in and committing a crime and they couldn't do anything, well, this actually happened. So there was a court case in 86, Oliphant versus Squamish, where a non-native Oliphant walked onto a native reserve and committed a crime. He was charged with assaulting a police officer, a native police officer. And he committed this crime, and then so obviously the police force tried to detain him until more authorities could arrive, and he felt that they didn't have any jurisdiction over him because he was a non-native and he is not part of the tribe and didn't live on the reservation. So he felt that they really had no authority over him. This eventually made its way up the flagpole until it got to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled in favor of Oliphant 6-2, a pretty wide margin that, in fact, these native courts really had no jurisdiction over non-natives. The only thing that they could do is govern the people that lived on their land and were a part of their tribe. This Supreme Court decision should be reconsidered and overturned because without full jurisdiction over their own land, these natives really have no way to protect their property, and more importantly, they cannot fully protect their citizens. This simply needs to be changed, and we have to give the natives the tribal sovereignty that they have been promised and that they deserve. Giving back these tribes the tribal sovereignty that they deserve is more important now than it's ever been. The rate at which these Native Americans are assaulted on their own land compared to non-natives is just absolutely ridiculous. To get an accurate grasp on this, we can take a look at the 2016 National Institute of Justice report. This report was very influential in this whole tribal sovereignty debate because it was the first real report that came out that really opened everyone's eyes to the problem that is truly at stake here. So this report said that violence against the American Indian men and women this report found that more than 84% of Native American women, roughly 1.5 million women, have been exposed to physical violence in their lifetime. 67% of these women were concerned for their personal and physical safety. 41% of these women sorry about that brief interruption there. I got a phone call and that completely stopped the recording. So I'm just going to pick up exactly where I left off. I'm sorry about that. 41% of these women have been physically injured from physical violence. They have been a victim of physical violence, stalking, or sexual violence. So if you compare that to the non-native rate of regular Americans, and that is astronomically higher. Also, in 2018, the Urban Health Institute, a Seattle-based Urban Health Institute, compiled a survey that reported 5,712 missing Native American women went missing, and only 116 of these were registered in the Department of Justice database. So you can see that these tribal nations are not getting the same treatment that the traditional American citizens find themselves receiving. Native Americans are 2.5 times more likely to be victims of violent crime, and Native American women and girls are 3 times more likely to be sexually assaulted than non-natives. And the sad part is that 86% of these sexual crimes are committed by non-natives. So with all these reports that keep coming out, the only thing that we're seeing is that this problem is growing, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. So as these more reports come out, hopefully we'll be able to make more progress in the problem that is the lack of tribal sovereignty that these tribes are experiencing. Secondly, giving these tribes the tribal sovereignty that they deserve will not only benefit them, but it will benefit us as well. So let's say that I'm speeding through a a Indian reserve. They technically cannot issue me a ticket for speeding. So what has to happen is they pull you over and they have to wait for a state trooper to come and issue a ticket. If we allow them to write tickets for non-natives, this would save our police force so much time and so much money. They would be able to write the ticket right there, and if the offender wishes to take that ticket to the court, they could do it in the tribe's court and not have to fill up the time in our court. Which leads me into the second part of why this would be so beneficial for both parties, is that the tribal courts would take so much weight and load off of our courts, which are already so flooded as they are. It would truly be beneficial for both parties if we grant them the tribal sovereignty that they deserve, and it would genuinely benefit both of us drastically. So in the future, I can just see our courts being lightened up, our police force being lightened up, and the tribes are given the tribal sovereignty that they deserve, and it will just help both parties. Overall, these tribal nations are not able to protect their own people, and not able to protect their own property. And without the full jurisdiction, we need to give them this full jurisdiction so they're able to protect themselves and protect their land. So overturning the Oliphant versus Suquamish court case would be able to do this. Thank you.